All right. Let's get started. This is part 23 of our series about on the 8th chapter of Bava Kama. We're getting close to the end of the chapter here. Hopefully we can finish it before the end of the semester. In any case, we are going to be this evening at the bottom of 91A and the top of 91B. And we are continuing to comment on the Mishnah that spoke about the financial penalties for humiliating people. Okay, and we start with we'll have a bunch of different sections, each of which will be introduced by a fragment of Mishnah. And our first fragment of Mishnah for the evening is about spitting at people. So it says, Rakak v'higia boharok. If somebody spat at somebody else and the spit actually gets on the other person. So Rav Papa said, Amar Rav Papa, lo shanu ella bo, aval bevigdo lo. So Rav Papa says you only pay this fine if the spit actually gets on the person. But if it gets on his clothes, then that does not count. Whether it means you get no punishment at all or just that it's a different amount of money is not completely clear to me. But I tend toward Rav Papa thinking actually that there's no fine at all, as you'll see in a second. Because the Gemara says, but v'nehave ki ba'ish b'dvarim. It should be like if somebody humiliates somebody else by talking, right? And so, okay, so you didn't succeed in making a physical attack on the body of the other person because you didn't succeed in actually spitting on their body, but you still embarrassed them. And so, maybe we should punish you for embarrassing them the same way as at this point the Gemara is presuming you would punish somebody for, I don't know, yelling at somebody your mother wears cowboy boots, combat boots, or whatever, like contentless, humiliating words you might yell at somebody. But the Gemara quotes these people, Ami b'ma'arava, they said in the West, right? And the West is, if you're standing in Babylonia, in Iraq, the West is Israel. They said in the West, in the name of Rabbi Yosei bar Avin, Zot omeret baisho b'dvarim patur miklum. Right? Their interpretation over in the land of Israel, their interpretation of this Mishnah was that it demonstrates that you only actually pay a fine if you humiliate somebody by physically attacking their actual body. Actually, physically attacking their clothing is apparently not good enough. And by extension, we're going to say that embarrassing them in a way that doesn't touch them physically at all with words, you don't pay anything. The Gemara seems to leave it there. That seems to be what there is. So it's not exactly sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me. But there's a relative of that idea is operating in this Gemara, in which you don't have legal liability for boshet unless there is a physical attack, not just on the person of the victim, but on the body of the victim. Their clothes or shoes or whatever are not close enough. And by a sort of kal v'chomer, their feelings are definitely not the same thing as their body. All right, moving on along. At the end of the list there was like I hesitate to call it this because it makes it sound sort of commercial, but there was sort of a price list for different kinds of humiliations that we saw in the Mishnah. And at the end of the list of prices, the Mishnah said, and this is the general rule, everything is according to his honor, which seems, as you will see in a minute, his honor seems to be his social class. So the Gemara wants to know, Ibayalahu, Tana Kama Lakula Kamar, did the Tana say this? The Tana Kama is the first Tana, so it's the opening position in the Mishnah, which often does not have a name, and so we call it the Tana Kama, which is just the first Tana. So did the Tana Kama say this is a leniency, meaning, well, we said you're supposed to pay this amount of money if you spit on somebody, and this other amount of money if you rip off somebody's head covering, and this other amount of money if you slap somebody across the face. But in the event that your victim was of lower social class, so that we don't really think their dignity is worth that much, then we'll charge you less, right? That's what it would mean for it to be a leniency. Oh, l'chora kamar, or was it said as a stringency, meaning that the price list is a list of minimums. You definitely have to pay whatever the amount is that's in this list, but if the person that you assaulted has more dignity than normal, right, which every fiber of my American being is crying out against the idea that some people have more dignity or more right to dignity than others, but we have to, live in the text that we're reading, and in the text that we're reading, there is certainly an expectation that some people's dignity is worth more than others financially, possibly because some people are willing or able to pay more to protect their dignity, right? And just the price of something is what people will pay for it. And also to some extent because dignity is a function of expectations. And if you never really expected to make it down the street without getting slapped, then your dignity is less infringed when you, not surprisingly, get slapped. But as I said, treating social class as a thing that halacha should encourage and embody is makes me very uncomfortable. But that is what is happening here. Okay, so when we say that it's a leniency, that means that the prices that are listed in the Mishnah are maximums. That's what you pay to a person of very high social class who you humiliate in this way. And if somebody had less social class, then you would pay them less. And when we say it's a stringency, that means that the prices that are in the Mishnah are minimums, and that's what you pay people at the bottom of the social ladder if you do these things to them, and that anybody who has more standing in society is going to get more money than what's on the list. Okay, so the Gemara says, "L'kula ka'amar, di'ika ani." So the Gemara is just basically explaining what I just said. So I stepped on my line. I should have waited a minute. So if it's a kula, if it's a leniency, that would mean that if somebody is a poor person, then you don't need to pay them quite as much. Oh, Dilma, or maybe l'chumra kamar, or maybe it was said as a stringency. Di'ika asher debayu lemetav le'tfei. And what that would mean is that if somebody is rich, you would need to give them more. Okay, so we're going to try to resolve the question of whether it's a leniency or a stringency. Tashma. So come in here, we're going to bring a proof text to try to determine the answer to this question. Midika amar Rabbi Akiva, from what Rabbi Akiva said, Afilu anim shebi Yisrael ro'inotan ki'ilu hein b'nei chorin sheyardu minechseihem shehem b'nei Abraham Yitzchak Yaakov. So this is actually the next line in our Mishnah, like the line right after where the Mishnah said, this is the rule, everything is according to his dignity or his honor. This is the next line of the Mishnah. And Rabbi Akiva says in the next line, even the poor people in Israel, by which I think he may mean even the poorest people in Israel, we see them as if they were free men, by which I think he means aristocrats, who have gone down from their property, meaning they're people who are of very high social class, but they happen at the moment not to have any money. Because these poor Israelites, poor Jews, are the children of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and that makes you that's a form of royal birth, right? So they, from a perspective of family or of birth, Rabbi Akiva is saying that all members of the Jewish people should be treated like aristocracy, because they are, because being descended from Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov is as good as it gets. And then we'll just deal separately with the money issue. And, having more money, having less money, this makes a little bit of a class difference. But in general, Rabbi Akiva wants to flatten all the class differences, because he sees being Jewish as by itself making you an aristocrat. And so that was the next line in the Mishnah. So the Gemara says, Shmamina, we can learn from this. Tana Kama Lakula Ka'amar Shmamina. We learn from this that when the previous position said everything is according to the person's dignity, that was a leniency. Meaning the first guy and Rabbi Akiva have to be in a dispute, right? The way the Mishnah is phrased, they have to be disagreeing about something. So if Rabbi Akiva is saying, no, we're going to treat the poor people like aristocrats, that must mean that the first guy was treating the poor people as getting less money than Rabbi Akiva would give them. And the Gemara assumes that means that they're getting less than the amount of money that's on the price list. And therefore, we're treating this as a leniency, which is to say that the price list was a list of maximums. That's what you get if you're at the very top edge of society, and everybody else gets less proportionate to their class. And Rabbi Akiva, it sounds like, is just going to give everybody in society whatever's on the price list, which is upheld by the story that we get right afterwards, in which Rabbi Akiva has what appears to be a poor and possibly somewhat uncultured woman who he grants the full price list price for what happens to her. Okay, and that is where we are going right now. The next quote from the Mishnah is Umaaseh be'echad shepara rosh ha'isha. So you might remember this story. We have a guy who uncovers a woman's head in the marketplace, and when sued in Rabbi Akiva's courtroom, Rabbi Akiva tells him he has to pay the full price for uncovering a woman's head in the marketplace, which I think is 200 zuz, although somebody can correct me if I got the number wrong. And the we'll call him the assailant, asks for some time. And so Rabbi Akiva gives him a deadline, and he uses the time that he's been granted to go and spy on this woman, or stalk her, whatever word you want to use for it. He goes and he stands near her home, and he watches her going in and out of her courtyard. And he waits for an opportune moment when he drops a very small container of very cheap oil on the ground near the entrance to her courtyard. And she comes running out of the courtyard and takes her scarf off and starts using her hand to pick up the oil and put it on her hair. It is not completely clear to me whether her hair is just like a device with which to carry the oil into her house, and then she's going to squeeze it out of her hair and use it as lamp oil or something like that, or whether she's actually putting it on her hair because this is a beauty treatment. It's not clear to me, but whatever it is, the amount of oil that he put on the sidewalk in front of her was worth only a very small amount of money. And he does this in front of witnesses, and he thinks he's demonstrated that to her dignity is worth very little. Right? She's willing to take off her scarf in order to get this, effectively this tiny amount of money worth of oil. And so he comes back to court, and he says to Rabbi Akiva, I'm supposed to pay this 200 zuz? I think the use of this to describe a human being isn't meant to be insulting and succeeds. And Rabbi Akiva says basically, yes. Right? Just because somebody's not supposed to injure themselves doesn't mean that if they do injure themselves and then you also injure them, that you don't have to pay for it. Which is I think it's a super important lesson in consent, which a lot of people living in the 21st century would do well to learn, which is that what I am willing to do or allow to be done willingly to myself, to my own body, to my own clothing, is my business. And it in no way gives other people permission to take liberties with me or my body or my clothing, just because they think that I apparently don't care about these things because I do them myself. Right? Rabbi Akiva says that's actually not a thing. People are entitled to say how and when they get humiliated, even if they or attacked or whatever, even if they apparently don't mind those activities. It doesn't that doesn't mean you can do it to them without their consent, and it doesn't reduce the penalty if you do. Okay, so that was the story. So now the Gemara wants to examine some of the details. The first question they have is Mi Havinan Zman. Wait a minute, why didn't Rabbi Akiva just make the guy cough up the money right there in the courtroom? Since when do we give people time until they have to pay? The Gemara thinks we just don't do that. Rabbi Chanina, but Rabbi Chanina said, we don't give people time for personal injuries. Presumably, that doesn't mean that you are expected to bring your life savings with you to the courtroom when you're on trial. So I don't think it means that we expect you to have the money to pay an arbitrarily large sum of money immediately, but we don't give you time just because you want time, right? We expect you to, pay. But the Gemara says, Kiloya avinan lezman chavala dechasre mamona. The Gemara says, well, when Rabbi Chanina said that we don't give time for personal injuries, that was because in a case of personal injury, you've actually cost the person something. You've damaged them, you've cost them their ability to go to work tomorrow, you've cost them their ability, the money that they're going to have to pay to the doctor. Maybe you've cost them the money they're going to have to pay to buy a new pair of pants. Whatever it is, there's an actual loss there. And in a case where there's an actual loss, it's not acceptable for you to take your time paying it back. The other person already suffered the loss. But aval boshet, but in a case of boshet, because boshet is not exactly like the other payments for injury, because in the case of boshet, the person has suffered, but they didn't suffer a financial loss. They suffered an emotional loss, which we are charging you money as a punishment for that, but it's not the same thing as a reimbursement for an actual financial cost. So in the case of boshet, delo chasrei mamona yavinan. In the case of boshet, because there wasn't an actual cost, an actual loss of money, we do in fact give the assailant time. Okay, now we move on to our next Mishnah fragment, which is Shamra omedet al petach chatzera. So the assailant was standing and spying on her in the doorway of her courtyard. And the next thing that happens there, which is the part that the Gemara is actually interested in commenting on, right? They quoted the beginning of the sentence, but they're interested in the end. The next thing that happens is Rabbi Akiva says she's not allowed to do this to herself, but you still have to pay. Okay, and so we're going to quote a different version of the story that seems to contradict that part. V'atanya, Amar lo Rabbi Akiva, tzalalta b'mayim madirim v'halita cheres b'yadecha. So Rabbi Akiva, in this version of the story, it seems to be a different version of the same story. And Rabbi Akiva in this version says to the assailant, you dove into these mighty waters, right? You put in a lot of work here, maybe even you endangered yourself. And what you brought up was a piece of broken pottery. Right? You put in all this work and what you got was nothing. Because what you've brought me is not more valuable than a piece of broken pottery. And this is still Rabbi Akiva talking. Adam rashai lachbo ba'atzmo, because a person is allowed to injure themselves. Okay, so in the Breita version, Rabbi Akiva's logic is that he doesn't at all care about this guy's information from spying on the woman in the doorway of her courtyard, because it doesn't matter. She can do anything she wants to herself, and she's just allowed to. That's just not connected to the question of whether someone else is allowed to injure her. But that's not what our Mishnah said. Our Mishnah said, even though she's not allowed to, nonetheless, you're not allowed to, and you have to pay her. Right? This other version of Rabbi Akiva seems to be saying that what she did was fine, and she's allowed to. So Amar Rava, lo kasha, kan b'chabalah, kan b'boshet. Rava says, okay, so let's say that that we can make a distinction here, and you're not allowed to injure yourself, but you are allowed to humiliate yourself. But the Gemara says, wait a minute, that doesn't work, because our Mishnah is the text where Rabbi Akiva says you're not allowed to, and our Mishnah is talking about a woman, it's talking explicitly about a woman taking off her head covering. There's no injury there. It's only embarrassing. So the Gemara says, but our Mishnah is talking about boshet. It's talking about humiliation. It is not talking about an injury of any kind. Ve'ktani, hachovel ba'atzmo, and this is the version of Rabbi Akiva from our Mishnah. Hachovel ba'atzmo, afal pi she'eino rashai patur. Right, so this is what Rabbi Akiva said: somebody who injures themselves, even though they're not allowed to do so, they're exempt. So it definitely can't be that you're allowed to embarrass yourself, but you're not allowed to physically injure yourself. That may be true, but it wouldn't solve our problem with Rabbi Akiva appearing to contradict himself, because that's backwards, right? We have one text in which Rabbi Akiva says you're not allowed to, and the other in which he says you are allowed to. They both actually use the language of personal injury, not the language of humiliation. And the one in which he says you're not allowed to is explicitly about humiliation that has no physical injury involved. Okay, so we're going to have to try again to resolve this contradiction between Rabbi Akiva. Achi kamar. This is what Rabbi Akiva must really have said to the guy in our mission. Lo mibaya boshet, the adam rashai levayesh. He says it's not. Obviously, it's the case with humiliation, where a person is allowed to humiliate himself, or in this case, herself. But it's also true of personal injury, where a person is not allowed to injure themselves, that other people who injure you are still responsible to pay. Okay, so that in the end, we decide that in fact, Rabbi Akiva is making this distinction between humiliation and physical injury. And if we rewrite the language of our Mishnah, we can even sort of make it say that what Rabbi Akiva actually told the guy was a combination of the two sentences. What he actually told him was, you're not allowed to injure yourself. But if you do, you're not allowed to embarrass yourself. But if you do embarrass you, all right, sorry. I'm going to try that again, and I'm going to get all the words right this time. You are allowed to embarrass yourself. And if you embarrass yourself, there's no penalty. And if somebody else embarrasses you, there is a penalty because they're not allowed to embarrass you. And you might have thought that wouldn't be true of injury because you're not supposed to injure yourself. But no, I'm going to tell you the same thing is true of injury. Even though you're not allowed to injure yourself, nonetheless, it is true that even if somebody is injuring themselves and you just do to them the same thing that they're doing to themselves, that is still not okay. And it is still going to get punished, we're still going to make you pay for it. Even though all you're doing is joining in the thing that they were doing to themselves, which they shouldn't have been doing to begin with. Right? The fact that somebody is in a, I guess even a criminal way, taking action against themselves that they shouldn't, even that does not in any way give other people an exemption from responsibility for making sure that they treat this person with respect and don't injure them. Okay, so we didn't really resolve the contradiction of Rabbi Akiva by saying that this version is legitimate or that version is legitimate. What we did instead was combine them and say he actually said both. He actually said both. You are allowed to embarrass yourself and you're not allowed to humiliate yourself. It was all part of one big speech that he was giving to explain to the to this guy that in fact you're not allowed to do these things to somebody else, even if they do them themselves, regardless, unconnected to the question of whether they're allowed to do it to themselves. Okay. Now we want to ask a related question, which is, wait a minute. Is it true that I'm not allowed to injure myself? It's my body. Why not? So we say, is it really true that a person is not allowed to injure themselves? But it says in the Braita, the Braita says, you might have thought that if somebody swears to do something bad to themselves and then didn't do it, that they would be patur, they would be exempt. Because we might have said that we might have said they're not allowed to injure themselves. And we do generally have a principle that if you take a vow to do something that is forbidden, the vow just isn't binding, right? We don't punish you for breaking your vow when you then do what you're supposed to do. We punish you instead for taking a frivolous vow that is not enforceable. And then whether you get punished is actually not connected to the question of whether you keep the vow or not, because the vow never took effect to begin with. So you might have thought that if you swore to do something bad to yourself, that it would fall into that category. And if you didn't do it, you would still be exempt. Talmud Lomar, that's why the Torah says lehara o lehitiv. And we need some psukim here. So let's go to Vayikra chapter 5, verse 4. Chapter 5, verse 4, here we are. So we are here in a list of reasons why you might have to bring certain kinds of sacrifices. And this is one of the crimes for which you would have to bring this kind of sacrifice. It says, O nefesh ki tishava levate bisvatayim lahara u lehitiv, or a person who swears by uttering with lips to do bad or to do good, anything that a person would move their lips to say in an oath, and then it was lost from him, meaning he forgot that he took this oath and he broke the oath, but by mistake, because he forgot he'd taken the oath to begin with. And then he knew. You found out that you had done it. Ashem, and he was guilty. For one of these things. Then if you're guilty, then you confess your sin and you bring a sacrifice and so on. But the crime of not fulfilling your oath, the oath itself is described as an oath to do bad or to do good. Okay, so the Braita that we're quoting here says that to do bad or to do good, lahara lahitiv, means maha tava reshut af hara'a reshut, that just as doing good is something which is discretionary, it's something which is allowed but not required. So similarly, the hara'a, the doings of something bad, should be something which is discretionary, meaning the only things that we're gonna hold you responsible for keeping an oath about are things that you had a choice about to begin with. If you take an oath to do something you had to do, or to not do something you have to do for that matter, or to not do something you're not allowed to do, or to do something you're not allowed to do, none of those are what we're talking about here. We're only talking about oaths to do or not do things where you had a choice legally. So that makes this whole combination here seems to mean the next line of the Gemara is avi nishba lahara ba'atzmo v'lo hara. So the Torah must be including as discretionary, as something which is optional. It must be including doing something bad to yourself. Because the Breita said that this pasuk proves that if I swore I was going to do something bad to myself, I am held responsible for that. That sounds like doing something bad to myself, which I'm leaving vague because at this point it's vague, is optional. It's discretionary. Or in the language of Rabbi Akiva, it's allowed, it sounds like. So Shmuel says, no, you're misunderstanding. He says, Amar Shmuel be'eshev b'ta'anit. Shmuel says, when we're talking about doing something bad to yourself, what it means is that you took an oath to fast an extra fast day. So it's, uncomfortable for your body, possibly even damaging to your body in a minor way. So we would call it doing something bad to yourself. Also in the realm of discretionary, people are allowed to accept an extra fast day. So that might not tell me anything one way or the other about whether I'm allowed to, I don't know, break my nose or, whatever it is we were thinking of when we said to injure yourself. But then we ask Shmuel, wait a minute. The next line of the Breita that we just quoted talks about doing discretionary good and bad things to other people. Which, how does that work with fasting? So we say, Shmuel, whatever it is we're talking about when we say doing bad to people has to be something you could do to yourself or you could do to other people. So dekavata gabe harat acherim, is there an equivalent to what you're saying about doing bad things to other people? Like, how do you? And he says, yeah, lahashivam betani, we'll make them fast. So the Gemara says, wait a minute. Acherim mi motiv lahem betani. He says, how can you make somebody else fast? Like, how does that even make any sense? So Shmuel says, well, yeah, you lock them in a room that doesn't have food in it, and you force them to undergo a fast day. So now we're beginning to talk about what actually really does honestly sound like assault. Right. So it's saying, I feel the need to get closer to God, so I'm not going to eat next Tuesday, which I, by the way, am not saying because I fast very poorly. I have no intention of taking a fast day, but saying that sort of thing sounds like a sort of religious activity about yourself that we could endorse. But I have to say, I don't think the Gemara is taking seriously the possibility that the Torah would really be okay with you taking an oath to lock somebody else up so that they couldn't eat for a day. Like that's not the sort of religious activity that we approve of. But we're gonna come at this but from a different direction. It's gonna turn out that it doesn't matter because we know Shmuel's wrong, but I think we would have rejected it anyway because I don't think we would see starving other people as a discretionary behavior in the same way as we see fasting ourselves as a discretionary behavior. In any case, that's as I said, we're going to prove Shmuel's wrong from a different direction. So we say Vahatanya, but it says in a different Breita. Actually, maybe it's the same Breita later on. I don't remember. Ezehu harat achirim. What does it mean to do something bad to somebody else? Akeploni veftzat mocho. I'm going to hit that guy and I am going to injure his brain. So that seems pretty unambiguous that we're talking about a physical attack on another human being. That's not there's nothing ambiguous about whether that would be forbidden. For sure, you cannot go attacking other people in order to injure their heads, and for sure you cannot take an oath to do so either. So Ella Tanai, rather, in fact, it must be that there is a dispute about whether you're allowed to injure yourself. For sure, you're not allowed to injure other people, just to be clear. But we seem to be asserting that there's some kind of disagreement here about whether it would be okay to injure other people. So the person who thinks it's okay to injure other people is not Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva, in the end, we decided, thinks it's okay to injure yourself. Rabbi Akiva said it's okay to humiliate yourself, but not okay to injure yourself. But it seems like the person who wrote the Breita that says that you can take an oath to hurt yourself, and that what it means to hurt other people means to attack them physically, that person apparently thinks that it is discretionary, it's permissible to do permanent damage to your own body. So this is our dispute. There's somebody who says a person is not allowed to injure themselves. And there is also somebody who says a person is allowed to injure himself or herself. So now we need to find who is the Tana. Like, really, is there really a position of a known Tana that says that you're allowed to injure yourself? Okay, so now we're going to go through some positions and see if we can come up with something. Ilema Haitana. So maybe it's this Tana. Detanya va'achad dimchem lenafshotechem edrosh. Right, this is back in Breshit 9:5. I believe that is in Parshat Noah. Just after God gives Noah permission to eat meat, and God is making this new distinction between killing people and killing animals, because just told Noah, now you're allowed to kill animals, but now he's got to explain, but you're not allowed to kill people. He says, I'm sorry, but the animals are not allowed to kill you. Sorry, I got the wrong pasuk. So, but your blood for your souls I will seek. From the hand of any animal I will seek it. Meaning, if an animal kills you, I'm going to go to the animal and say, where is so and so's blood? And I'm going to put the animal on trial, and I'm gonna punish him. And from the hand of the human, from the hand of a man, I will seek his brother, the life of a person. So there seem to be some extra words there. There seem to be some strange wording, but it would seem that the pshat of this is people are allowed to kill and eat animals. Neither animals nor people are allowed to kill people. And God is promising that he's going to do something about it if either people or animals kill other humans. But we're interested here in some of the extra words in the first half of the pasuk, because the first half of the pasuk it didn't just say, I am going to demand your blood from the hand of every animal. It said, I am going to demand your blood for your souls from every animal. And the thing is that the word that is used for soul also means self. So you can read it as, I'm going to demand your blood from yourself. Meaning, the one I'm going to punish for killing you is you. I'm going to demand that you explain to me why you killed yourself. That is a possible reading of the beginning of the verse if you cut off the rest of the words from the rest of the verse, which is one of the many legitimate ways to derive halacha, which we've seen before. So Rabbi Elazar said, "Mi'ad nafshotechem edroshetimchem," from yourself, from your soul, I will demand your blood, which seems to be I don't want to, it's not exactly a prohibition, it's more of a threat to punish people who commit suicide. Although exactly how you punish somebody who's dead already is a theological question I know, right? It seems like whatever it is that you're doing to the soul of someone who's already dead must be different than what you're doing to the live body of the animal that's in the rest of the pasuk that killed the person. So somehow there's a little bit of an incoherence here about how we're using the vocabulary. But one way or the other, Rabbi Elazar sees the extra words in this pasuk as a prohibition against suicide. And we're suggesting initially that maybe Rabbi Elazar is the one who thinks you're not allowed to injure yourself because he thinks it's connected to not killing yourself. But we say, no, that doesn't work because Dilma Katalashani, maybe killing yourself is different. Maybe you're allowed to injure yourself but you're not allowed to kill yourself. Like they're not convinced those two are the same thing. Okay, let's go on to the next person. Ella Haitanu. So maybe it's really this person. Ditanya Mekarin al Hamet Velo Midarke Amori. So this Braita says you can tear your clothing about a dead person, and it's not forbidden as a Gentile practice, as a practice of the Canaanites, which is a really interesting thing to say because in our world, the only people who tear their clothing to mourn the dead are Jews, and we think of this as a very Jewish practice. It would seem that in the time of the Gemara, there are at least people who consider the possibility that maybe it's not a Jewish practice and maybe we should stop people from doing it. But so Rabbi Elazar says you're allowed to tear your clothes. It's not forbidden because of the ways they are. But Shamati shehamikaret al hamet yoter midai lo mishum bal tashli. But Rabbi Elazar says, but I heard that if you tear your clothes more than you're supposed to, then we whip you because you're destroying things unnecessarily. So that sounds like, well, I can't tell you that it's not a Jewish practice, but I can still try to stop you from doing this as much as possible because we don't approve of ripping clothes. And in that case, we could say that Rabbi Elazar would say v'kol sheken gufo, and he would make a call v'chomer that if you're not allowed to tear your clothes unless you have a really good reason. It sounds like having a good reason makes things different. So maybe having a good reason would make it okay to injure yourself too, if this is our logic. But you're not allowed to tear your clothes without a good reason. So we think he would say kal v'chomer, you're not allowed to tear your body without a good reason. Except maybe not. The dilma begadim shani. But maybe clothes is different. The pseida delo hadarhu, because clothes does not heal. Skin heals, but clothes doesn't. And while we're on the subject, we're going to quote about this text about Rabbi Yochanan and Rav Chisda and how they honored their clothing more than they honored their own bodies. So, Kiha de Rabbi Yochanan kari lamane mechabduta. Rabbi Yochanan used to call his clothing the honor giver. Which really we've quoted this because of Rav Chisda, but we're just quoting a whole chunk of text, and we're actually interested in the next line. Rav Chisda kadhava maski beini hizmi v'higi madli lehu lemane. Rav Chisda, when he would walk in a place where there were plants that were going to tear his clothes, he would hold his clothes up out of the way, presumably allowing his legs to get ripped instead of his clothes. Amar, and he would say, Ze ma'ala arucha v'ze no ma'ala arucha. He would say, well, my legs will heal, but my shirt's not going to heal. So it seems like that the kal v'chomer we were trying to make between clothing and people's bodies is not going to work because it's there seem to be people who think that it is not a foregone conclusion, that it is more okay to tear clothes than it is to tear human skin. And since there seem to be people who feel that way, therefore it's not obvious that there's a kal v'chomer that if you can't tear clothes, you definitely can't tear skin. So we can't do that. Right, remember that in order to make a Kal V'chomer argument, the Kal V'chomer is going to have to be consistently and clearly that it's in every way more, one thing is more likely than the other. If it goes both directions, then that ruins the logic and you can't do it. Okay, so in fact, it's this other person, Ella Haitanahu. Ditanya, Amar Rabbi Elazar HaKafar Beribi. So we have this guy, Rabbi Elazar HaKafar Beribi, who seems to be a different person than the Rabbi Elazar that we had a minute ago. And he said as follows, Ma Talmud Lamar v'kiper alav me'asher chatal hanefesh. So here we are in a passage in Bamidbar about the Nazir. A Nazir is somebody who takes a completely voluntary commitment to avoid eating or drinking grape products or alcohol, to avoid dead bodies, and including their own relatives, and to avoid cutting or shaving their hair for a period of time. And when that commitment is over, there's this whole ceremony involved in getting back out of the commitment and becoming a regular person again. And part of that ceremony is bringing a sin offering. So this pasuk here, and he will atone for him from the way that he sinned against his soul, that pasuk is part of the description of the bringing of that sin offering. And Rabbi Elazar HaKafar Beribi says, he said, what way did this soul sin? Like, what did he do wrong? This is supposed to be a religious activity that you take on this extra commitment for God. You do this thing, it makes you a more committed, more religious person temporarily. What did he do wrong? Why is he apologizing? So Rabbi Elazar HaKafar Beribi says, the problem is that he caused himself pain by avoiding alcohol. And apparently it's not okay to, and we're talking about a commitment of a minimum of 30 days. Usually the standard is only 30 days. It doesn't seem like an enormously big deal to avoid alcohol for a month. On the other hand, I heard a fair amount of whining on social media about dry January. So perhaps actually skipping alcohol for a month does make you miserable if you normally drink a lot of alcohol, which is not my thing. In any case, the suggestion here is that this person, by refraining from wine, caused himself undue distress. V'halo dvarim kal v'chomer, and this is a kal v'chomer. This person who only denied himself wine is called a sinner. Somebody who refrains from everything, all the more so. Right? So somebody, if you live an ascetic lifestyle, it seems to be the point here, living an ascetic lifestyle is a sin because it makes you uncomfortable. Making yourself uncomfortable is a sin. Now, it's not that hard to go from Rabbi Elazar HaKafar Beribi's position that making yourself uncomfortable is a sin, and to make the very small leap from making yourself uncomfortable is a sin to physically injuring yourself is a sin. That's actually a very small leap because presumably it does make you uncomfortable when you injure yourself. So we have found the person who explicitly says that you're not allowed to injure yourself. Okay, that is the end. Do we have questions? John.
A Nazir is refraining from wine and various other products. Mm-hmm. How are they not falling into these categories?
Okay, so you're going to have to tread a fine line here, where you're going to have to believe that Rabbi Elazar HaKafar Beribi thinks that it's a sin to be a Nazir, but a sin that you're allowed to commit, while it is a sin to, say, break your nose, but that's a sin you're not allowed to commit. And somehow you've crossed a line somewhere in between, and the Gemara does not get into the exact granular basis for saying that they're both sins, but you're allowed to do one and you're not allowed to do the other, that that part has been left unaddressed, and that is a weakness here of this argument. But it's going to be, there's a stream starting from Rabbi Elazar HaKapar Baribi and going through history, through the Rambam, and through a lot of other Jewish thinkers, that being a Nazir is actually not really a good thing. When you bring the sin offering at the end of the process, it's because you weren't supposed to be a Nazir to begin with. And yet somehow all of those people have to cope with the fact that the Torah created this thing that you're apparently not supposed to do and gave you complicated instructions for how to do this thing that you're apparently not supposed to do. And that's a difficult thing to explain, because if you're really not supposed to do it, why make it to begin with? It's that one is a problem. There is, by the way, the other side of the dispute, which is not quoted here. The other side of the dispute says that the reason you bring a sin offering is because you're supposed to stay a Nazir forever, and what you're apologizing for is going back to normal life. Which that in the Middle Ages, that position is represented by the Ramban. I don't actually remember who the person in the Gemara is disagreeing with Rabbi Elazar HaKapar Baribi, but somehow everybody is going to have to cope with the fact that this person is voluntarily becoming a Nazir and then stopping to be a Nazir, and one of those activities is a sin. And everyone is going to have to cope with that somehow. And then somehow that we're going to have to import into here that this is a sin, but it's a sin you're not supposed to do. And it's everyone is going to have to do a little bit of hand waving to distract people from the fact that they didn't quite explain it. Okay, anybody else?
Hi, Deborah.
Yeah.
I have something to tell you about outside of this class.
Okay.
Well, just very quickly, what you're getting, what the Mishnah got to hear at the end goes back to Shmuel with saying, I will fast. I mean, it's very similar. But
except I
Yeah.
think everybody thinks you're allowed to fast. That's the problem with that's the problem with Shmuel, is that in the end I don't think there's anyone who thinks you're not supposed to fast. And I think that what Shmuel's doing there is taking a very extreme position that the worst thing you're allowed to take an oath to do is to fast, and anything that's like more damaging than that you're not allowed to take an oath to do at all.
Okay.
So, you know, any ascetic practice more unpleasant than fasting, Shmuel would just say is just forbidden, which may be connected to the fact that Shmuel's a doctor, incidentally. I don't actually know anything about whether there's a connection there, but it's not impossible.
Okay.
Okay. We are gonna meet again next Monday night. I think we probably have 4 or 5 classes left, and I'm gonna try to make sure we finish this by the time I go away for summer vacation. But I guess if that's all, then I will see you guys next week.
Please
Thank
stay on
you.
the line, Deborah.
I'm staying. I'm not going anywhere. Yes, Jerry, how can I help you?
Okay, I think it's just the two of us. You might want to
Mhm.
stop recording too.
I don't think I have power over that, unfortunately,
No? Okay,
but I'm happy to call you on the phone instead if you want.
no, that doesn't matter. I was in Atlanta last weekend, for
Like
my,
yesterday?
huh?
Like yesterday, the day before?
No,
That
a
last
week
weekend?
ago.
Oh, okay.
The
Because
end of
I was
April.
in Atlanta 2 days ago. That's why I
Ah.
asked.
Anyways, my grandniece, my niece's daughter had her bat mitzvah, and her
Mazel tov.
there is Rabbi Heller.
Oh,
So I had a nice little chat with him. He told me to send my regards to you and the rabbi.
thank
And,
you.
And I'd love to hear the story of how you met him, but that's he
We were in college together. He's a couple years older than I am, but we overlapped by 2 years, I think. And he was, when I got there, well on his way to making a siyum on Shas of Mishnah. And we were friends, and we were briefly chavrutas. We learned a couple of Masechtot of Mishnah together. And yeah, we're still friends on Facebook, but I haven't seen him in person in many, many years.
anyways, I wanted to fulfill my promise to him, and
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
it was an interesting Shabbos. It was a I don't know where to begin, but it's learning things about my family that I never knew, and getting to see family that I hadn't seen in a long time. And anyways, be well. And
Good. Thank you very much.
you're welcome. Take care.
Good night.
Yeah, bye-bye. Good night.